buying a house is in fact a process that requires 2 years of planning and preparation. This process looks like this, and this is not something the banks will tell you. So let's suppose this is your timeline, right? So we got 0, 1, 2, because I mentioned that is a process that takes 2 years or more. And what goes into this process is constant planning, constant monitoring, and then eventually get to the execution of things, right? And this process, it's kind of like a cycle, so to speak. So from point 0 to year 1, you have to do all of this: planning, monitoring, executing. And if things go well, you repeat that process again on year 2. And if things go well in year 2, you will finally be able to buy your house. But when things don't go according to plan, your process will look something like this, right? So let's say you get started on point 0 all the way to year 1 with your planning, with your monitoring and your execution, but then something went wrong and it didn't go according to plan. Now what will wind up happening is that you're adding an extra year to your timeline. This is why I say that buying a house could take you more than 2 years, because what you don't do in 2 years prior will end up affecting you ahead down the road, right? And this process will get repeated over and over again. If in year 2 things don't go well, then you added another year on to year 4 until maybe finally, once you get things done right, you have learned from your mistakes and everything aligns with you, you will finally be able to buy the house that you so much wanted. This problem happened to me the first time I wanted to buy a house. And I know that you're probably going through a similar situation. And that's why you're here, to find solutions and hopefully to prevent the mistakes that I made. The way banks work is that they seek to put together a puzzle of you. So let's say this is you, right? You are the puzzle. And as every puzzle, it will have different pieces that make up this puzzle. So on one end, you will have your income. On this side, you will have your DTI, which we will talk about in a bit. Let's say on this side, you have your length of employment. And then over here, we have your credit. And then on this end, we're gonna talk about your down payment. The first one to consider is your income. Why? Because income is the piece that takes the longest to plan and execute, since this depends on 2 factors: your professional skills and the type of job you can get with those skills. The more developed and unique your professional skills are, the higher your income. And for those who are already scared by the subject of skills, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Not having these kind of skills just means that you will have to work harder and get an extra job. You see, income has a lot of weight because it affects how much you can get approved for in your mortgage. Banks tend to approve between 3 to 4 times your annual income. The next point has to do with your DTI, which stands for debt to income ratio. That is the ratio of your income in proportion to your debt. The bank prefers your DTI to be below 30%. The lower the better. Let's suppose you have the following annual expenses. So there is your rent, right? Which will, let's say, assign $12,000. Then it's your credit card. So let's say those are about $5,000 a year. Then you have your cable of your internet, and that's $1,000 a year. Then there's also your cell phone bill, $1,000 a year. And your electricity over here, that's $1,500 a year because, summer months, the AC and stuff like that. And then there's also, your student loans. Why not? And that is about $3,000 a year, right? And all of that is summing up to $23,500. And the bank views all of this as debt, okay? Because those are responsibilities that you have to pay, and therefore it's taking money away from your budget, which could be used to pay the mortgage, right? And so the way the bank does the calculation is that it takes your debt, right? What they view as your debt, and then they will divide that by your income. So since we've been using $60,000, let's just divide that number by 60,000, and you will wind up with a DTI of 39.2. This is way too high for the bank's liking. Again, the bank will prefer your DTI to be below 30%. And there are several ways for you to lower that DTI. Reducing your debt, for example, changing your cell phone bill for a cheaper one, consumer less electricity, for example, lowering or eliminating debt, for example, your student loans, and generating more money, because by generating more income, your DTI will actually go down. The next piece of the puzzle is your credit, which doesn't need an introduction. The bank prefers that you have a FICO score of 720 or above in order to qualify for a mortgage with good rates in all three bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And make sure the score is above 720 in all three bureaus, okay? Because the bank will always go to the middle score. Otherwise, this will happen. So let's suppose you have your scores here. So let's say 720, maybe there is a 680 over here, and there's a 750 on this end. And let's just randomly assign the bureau. So this is Experian. Let's say this one belongs to TransUnion, and this last one is for Equifax. So like I mentioned, the way the bank works is that whenever they're looking at all the scores from all three bureaus, they're going to end up choosing the one in the middle, which is this score right here, right? This one here is the lowest, this one here is the highest, so they're going to go for that 710. And because your middle score happens to be under 720, that means that the rates that you're gonna get are not gonna be the cheapest. You're gonna get a rate, but it's gonna be slightly higher than you would have normally liked because you missed that 720 benchmark. So first-time home buyers, people who are looking to buy homes, whether with assistance or not, what is it that you need to get yourself together and in order so that people don't reject you or the lenders don't send you away because maybe you're not lendable, right? The very first step that you should do is to get your taxes in order, right? So taxes in order, preferably for the past 2 years. Why? Because the banks need to see how much money you're making. This isn't like, the pre-2008 that you can just simply walk up to a bank and say, hey, I'm making $1 million a year. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, sure, we'll believe you. Now, it doesn't work that way anymore. They do believe you, but they have to verify that you're in fact telling the truth. So if you're saying that you're making, let's say, for example, $50,000 a year, they need to see evidence that you're making, in fact, $50,000 a year. And that's why you do it through your taxes. That's one, right? So verification. Another reason why you need to get your taxes in order is because the amount of money they're gonna lend you will be based on that tax return. So if your tax return is reporting that you make $50,000 a year, they will lend you money based on this $50,000. And the way they do it is that they will base it on, let's say, 3 times or 4 times your income. So the range that you could be qualifying for could range somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000, just to give you an estimate, right? Now, the second step is to be aware of your budget. And we just covered that just now. What is your budget? Well, it's this number and this number right here, right? So that means that if you make $50,000, then you can qualify for somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000. If you make $60,000 a year, then you take $60,000, you multiply that by 3, or you multiply that by 4, and that should give you a decent range, an approximation of how much you can actually afford, right? The next thing you're gonna do is to determine how much money you need, right? And that will depend on the type of mortgages that you qualify. So let's say, for example, if you do qualify for an FHA, and we talked about this before, so we're talking about 3 to 5%. Let's assume that the house that you saw that you like, just for example purposes, costs $100,000. That means that with a 5%, you will only need to put down $5,000. That's not so bad, right? $5,000 for down payment, so down payment. But let's say you don't qualify for an FHA, that's okay, it's not the end of the world. Let's assume you do qualify for a conventional mortgage, and a conventional mortgage can range somewhere between 20 to 25%, which means if we're going to use the higher end of it, that you will need to put down $25,000 as down payment. So that would give you a sense of how much money you need to set aside, whether it's your savings or maybe you can borrow it from an uncle or sister or brother or your parents, whatever, but at least it gives you an understanding of how much money you need. And in addition to that, you should also consider closing costs. Closing costs are usually 3 to 5% of the purchase price of the house. And that means that it could translate to somewhere to $3,000 to $5,000. So let's say, for example, if you did qualify for an FHA, you will have to add $5,000 to this number, which will translate to $10,000 cash that you will need in order to be able to afford that property. If you qualify for a conventional, a traditional mortgage, what you're going to do is you're going to add the $5,000 here, which means you will need at least $30,000 in order to close on a $100,000 home. The next step that you're going to do is to work on your credit, particularly on your FICO score. Why is it so important? Well, if you're looking for financing and you have a bad credit score, you won't qualify for any mortgages. No one is going to lend you. Or let's say if you do happen to be fortunate enough to find a lender to give you money in spite of your low credit score, chances are is that that loan, that mortgage is going to be a very high interest mortgage. So a second purpose for having a good credit is getting good rates, right? So having a rate of, let's say, for example, 6.99% versus a rate of 2.99%, it might seem small, but it makes a difference. Over the life of a mortgage, let's say a 30-year mortgage, we're talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about the 6 digits that you could be saving if you qualify for the best rate possible. I know a lot of people look at their credit and they see, hey, I got a 620, 650, 720, 800, you name it, right? But do you truly know what makes up that score that you have, or what's preventing you from getting a higher score? You see, a lot of people go to the bank and they apply for a mortgage, and then the minute their credit report gets pulled, they are amazed at some of the things that they see in their score. Like, what? I have a debt from like 10 years ago that no, that's not right. But that's what happens when you're not monitoring your credit constantly, when you're not truly understanding what's preventing you from becoming better or what's impacting your credit. Sometimes you'll be surprised at how simple those mistakes are and how easy it is for you to fix it. So let's say, for example, you can go to a bank and say that you're interested in getting a mortgage, and you're filling up your application and you're saying that, hey, you have a total of $300 in debt. And the bank takes your application in, pulls your credit, and all of a sudden it shows that you have a $3,000 debt in your credit report. And when the bank is telling you about it, you're kind of like surprised, but you're like, no, that's wrong. I mean, I know my credit. I monitor it constantly. I understand my credit. And I will tell you that that $3,000 debt is not accurate. I owe only $300. And by you knowing that, you can immediately detect the mistake. The mistake could have been caused by a fat finger. Maybe whoever's working on the credit reporting agency had a bad day. Maybe they made a typo because they weren't paying attention. And instead of like typing 300 in your credit report, somebody typed in $3,000, right? That simple mistake can be fixed with a very simple phone call, and just within a matter of days, you can have that credit report adjusted and updated to the accurate information. And guess what's going to happen? Your credit score is going to go up because it's not the same to owe $300 than owing $3,000, right? Your credit is going to see an improvement, but it wouldn't be possible unless you know what's going on with your credit. By that, I'm not saying that you need to be an expert in the field and that you need to know every single slang that is out there, but there are two terms right here that you truly need to become very familiarized with. The first one, it's loan to value. And loan to value typically appears in your offer letter as LTV, right? So what does LTV mean? So sometimes when you look at the offer letter from the banks, you will see an LTV of 80. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the bank is going to lend you 80% of the value of the house, and then you have to, provide the remaining 20%. That's why you see a down payment request of 20%. Sometimes you see a down payment request of 25. So LTV means whatever difference the bank is willing to put in for you so that you can get a hold of that property. An LTV of 75, that means you will have to put in a down payment of 25%, right? We all have a piggy bank. We all think of, having savings for a rainy day. So having reserve funds, it works the same way for the bank. The bank wants to make sure that, in the event that something happens to you, maybe you lose your job, maybe, you're getting divorced, maybe an accident happened within the family, that you have enough rainy funds to cover the mortgage payments. And that's what they call reserve funds. Typically, the bank requests you to have somewhere between 6 months to 12 months worth of reserve funds. And here's a tip for you. The more reserve funds you have, the more chances you have to negotiate either a lower interest rate or just simply a better LTV or just simply better terms with the bank when it comes to your mortgage. Let's say that you did go to the bank and you're about to close, and all of a sudden the bank is saying, you know what, you don't have enough reserve funds and you need to do something about it, right? So what most people tend to do is that they go to their parents or they go to their friends or siblings or anyone close to them and they ask to borrow the money. Just let me borrow $10,000. I'll keep it in my account. But then as soon as I close my mortgage, I will take that money and give it back to you, right? Sounds very easy and simple. Guess what? The bank doesn't like that. Depositing your salary, that's okay because they expect you to get paid from your job and they know that there's a recurrent income that is coming, every 15 or perhaps every end of the month. But when they see all of a sudden a large sum deposited right before that closing, they, red flags come up. They're wondering, okay, where in the world did you get that money? Remember, the banks are jealous. They want to be the only one in the equation. They don't want you doing business with anybody else. They want to be the only ones who get to collect on that debt. And by you having that large deposit of money, especially unusual, into your account at the very last minute, it's just something that makes them uneasy, right? So now what's the solution to that? Well, the solution, it's planning. If you plan beforehand and if you anticipate beforehand that the bank, it's going to ask you for reserve funds, thanks to this video, now you know who to reach out and how long do you need to keep that amount in your bank account. So let's say if the bank is saying, well, we need at least 6 months worth of reserve funds in your account, and we're going to ask you, bank statements over the last 6 months to verify that. Now you know that whatever amount that you are either planning on saving or that you plan to borrow from someone else, now you're going to leave those in your account for the minimum amount of time that is required by the bank. Call it 6 months, call it 12 months. That's how you don't raise that red flag, and the bank could, be at ease that, hey, in the event that something happens to you, the bank will always get paid. So you're going to get a copy of your credit score, right? Or your credit report, right? But in order to access your credit report, you will go to a website that's called Experian.com. You're going to create an account in Experian.com so you can check your FICO score, you can monitor it. And once you get to that perfect point, to that ideal point that you're going to qualify for good rates, you're going to make a copy of that credit report and you're going to go to the bank and start shopping for rates, right? So get credit report and shop for rates. Why do I say shop for rates? Because you don't want to go into a bank and say, hey, I want to see how much money I qualify for, and then have them run your credit. You don't want to do that because you don't buy into the first store that you walk into. You typically want to go to multiple stores and you want to check different products before you find the one. So it's kind of like the same dynamic. You're going to go to multiple banks. You're going to bring them your credit report. You're going to tell them, I just want to see or get an approximation as to how much I can qualify for and what are the rates that you're giving me. I am not asking for a pre-approval letter. Do not run my credit yet. All I need is for you to tell me what is the approximation that I could qualify for. I just need a pre-qualification as to how much. And once you get multiple rates from different banks, then you're going to find the one, right? Selecting the right bank that you want to work with. And that is the bank that you're going to provide all documentation that they require, call it the taxes, copies of your employment letter, copies of your address, driver's license, whatever is it that they request, you give it to them, right? And once you go through the entire qualification process, what they're going to do, they're going to give you something that is called the pre-approval letter. Now, why is this letter so important? It serves multiple purposes. One, it's gonna help your realtor scan you. See, there are a lot of people who want to buy houses, but they're not exactly ready to buy houses. But sometimes these families or these couples or these people, they just wanna go look for houses for fun. They just wanna check it out. And realtors don't like wasting their time unless they show up in their open houses. They don't like people calling them up and say, hey, I want to check out this house. And maybe you have no intention of buying. So the first question a professional realtor will ask of you is, hey, do you have a pre-approval letter? If you do have one, then I will show it to you. If you don't have one, I won't bother, right? So that's one. Second, typically, you have a better bargaining power if you do have a pre-approval letter. That means that if the seller sees it, it's going to give you preference in comparison to other offers. Why? Because the seller knows that by you having a pre-approval letter, that means you can close faster than other people who are interested in the house, but maybe they don't even know whether they qualify for the house or not. So that's another reason as to why it is so important to have a pre-approval letter. And once you have all of this readily available, the very last step that you do is to look at houses. I know it sounds surprising, perhaps even confusing, because most people tend to want to look at houses first. But what happens when you look at a house first instead of doing all these other steps that I talked about? Well, there's an emotional component to it, right? You fall in love with the house, you see the pictures, you like the kitchen, you show up, you take a look at it and like, oh my God, I really like this house. But maybe you don't qualify for the house and then you get disappointed. Or maybe you can afford that house, or maybe you do get approved for that house, but it might not be the right house for you because it's too expensive and you might not be able to keep up with the mortgage. That's how you see people foreclosing because they bought too much house, they bought too much property because they were trying to keep up with the Joneses. And at the end of the day, maybe they just end up foreclosing it because perhaps an unforeseen circumstance happened. People lose their jobs, maybe there was death in the family, and next thing you know, boom, they foreclose, right? So that's why you always start up with your taxes, you start up with your budget, because that will give you the right amount as to how much housing can you truly afford without having to be house poor. That way you can still go out and enjoy some time with your friends, go to the movies, have fun, and then come back to a place that you can call home without feeling that you're throwing your money away. And that doesn't mean anything. And if you don't qualify for a lot of money, that's not the end of the world. You can just continue saving money, or you can just simply buy a smaller house and then save up for another one. Things change, circumstances changes, but what's important here is that you're doing it the right way. And that's by doing the proper budgeting so that you don't wind up in a very difficult situation that you might regret. Let's face it, not everyone is honest. You can see a beautiful house on the outside and you can ask the realtor or the seller, hey, is there any problems with this house? Guess what they're gonna say? No. That's why you trust, but you verify. You always have to perform an inspection in your house because that's how you know what you're actually buying. Are they truly saying that the house has no issues, and is that truly what you're buying? Or maybe the box is shiny on the outside, but the minute you move in, everything starts breaking. You get water leaks from the roof, you find surprises behind the wall, and you definitely don't want to deal with that situation like that. I've seen countless scenarios in where people are so desperate to buy a property that they don't even bother doing an inspection. And then after they take over, the nightmare starts happening. They have to spend a lot of money fixing a property that they shouldn't have bought in the first place. So don't be one of those. Always be ready with an inspection. And guess what? Besides that, an inspection can also help you negotiate. Let's say you do an inspection and you found some issues with the house that you want the seller to repair. Now you have the bargaining power. Now you can tell the seller, you either fix this or you will have to discount the price of the house because I'm not paying for a house that has issues. Or maybe if they don't want to fix it, you can use that report. You can leverage that report to walk out of the whole deal altogether, right? That's in an extreme case. Now that you're here, I want to know what happened. Did you learn something new? Did you make any of these mistakes? Tell me about it. And if you haven't bought a house yet, tell me, what do you know now that you didn't know before you watched the video? These are some of the mistakes that now you can prevent because you actually took the time to invest in yourself and watch this video.